Thank you very much. It seems sensible to spend the end of a magnificent day discussing the future. None of us are going to be amplified, but we have got microphones for the purpose of the recording, and this will be handed round later if you're minded to ask questions or otherwise make interventions. One thing that we know about institutions is that if they don't change, they decline, that they roll backwards. One thing that we know about Leckhampton and have been celebrating here today has been the extraordinary energy, vision, and foresight of its founding in 1961. Leckhampton was founded in a period in the 1960s which was also concerned with the founding of what were then called new universities, and also in Oxford and Cambridge with a movement that would lead to the expression of various graduate colleges. One of the interesting, I think, and lasting legacies of Leckhampton is that it did not become a separate graduate college. This is not Corpus's answer to Clare Hall, although it's not clear that that wasn't the intention of many of those who were engaged in the foundation of Leckhampton in 1961. And Leckhampton's journey across the last 60 years has been one often of a complex relationship with the old house, with the mothership, with the other part of college in town. One of the things that we've been concentrating on in the last 5 years that had its middle cut out through pandemic, has been on the relationship between the old house and Leckhampton. That is to say, thinking about the constituent parts of the College of Corpus Christi and the relationship between our graduate community and our undergraduate community. And that, of course, is something that has changed significantly in the last 15 or 20 years, not only because the PhD has now become something which so many more people do as a gateway to research, but perhaps more importantly in the last 15 years because of the creation of the one-year MPhil in a range of subjects, which has led to a completely different kind of graduate experience, but also because in the same period, the STEM subjects as undergraduate degrees are now 4 years long rather than the traditional 3 years, which remains in humanities. So that there's been, as it were, a blurring of the once more rigid boundaries between the undergraduate experience and the graduate PhD experience by the creation of the 4th year of the undergraduate degree and the 1-year MPhil. And there's a way in which Leckhampton has to be thought about on that line of engagement between graduate and undergraduate, how these two communities, the Old House and Leckhampton, need to connect. And that needs to be done without losing what today has very clearly shown is precious about having a graduate community. So for me, the challenge is, what does a college do in thinking about having a substantial graduate community on a site at some distance from its main city site, on a site which is undeniably magnificent, one of the hidden great treasures of Cambridge, but at the same time is resolved not to solve the problem simply by pushing that community away and saying, here, be your own separate graduate college. Perhaps the flagship initiative of the couple of years before COVID was a concentration on the bridging course, a particular initiative that many of you may know about in relation to undergraduate students, an expansion of our undergraduate intake by 10 to 15%, and a particular concentration on those from underrepresented and disadvantaged educational and social backgrounds. And I think it's fair enough to say, particularly in this insider company, in an unvarnished way, that after holding the bridging course every year for the last 3 years, despite the pandemic persisting in that in person, that we are on the edges of a significant transformation of our undergraduate body. And I should say in brackets that last year we had one of our best years in top examination results. So that project has worked extraordinarily well. And now we need to think about how we extend something of that commitment to widening participation also to our graduate community. And that's a complex business both in itself and in relation to the college. And the other strand that we've started to think about is that we also need to work out a built environment, both at Leckhampton and in the old house, which reflects some of those transformative social and intellectual ambitions. We've commissioned a master plan which embraces the whole site, because I think it's important that when we talk about the college, we think equally of the old house and Leckhampton, but that we think how the architecture of both of these places can express some of the fundamental and different strengths of those two complementary communities. When I became master, I said very clearly that one of the things that I was not going to do was to raise money for a new building. That I wasn't going to go down that usual route of solving whatever problem you thought confronted yourself by building yet another new building. But that rather I was going to ask the college to look at its substantial estate and think more cleverly, more adroitly about how that estate might be optimized and how we might construct a built environment that reflected better our visions of community, both undergraduate and graduate at Leckhampton. So that's my framing, as it were, for thinking about the future of Leckhampton. And I've asked 3 of my colleagues, 3 of the college's senior officers, to give their view from where they stand about how that might work itself out. We're going to start with the current warden, J.D. Rhodes, who's going to just take you through some of the insights that were offered by the master planning process on Leckhampton. And essentially, that's a story about how we have an opportunity now to integrate a set of buildings that were assembled piecemeal into something that looks coherent and workable as a site, but is also deeply respectful to its origins in 1961 and back, of course, to the earlier origins of Leckhampton House itself. And then Michael Sutherland, who's in the interesting position of being undergraduate admissions tutor, but also graduate admissions tutor in the sciences, to explain some of the challenges that now confront an admissions tutor for graduates, and particularly tell you something of the problems that frame a lot of our discussions on this surrounding graduate funding and some of the small successes that we've been able to celebrate in the last couple of years. And then lastly, Marina Frasca-Spada, senior tutor for the whole college, for both graduates and undergraduates. And that is part of that sense of coming together as a whole college that's been so important in the last 4 or 5 years, to reflect on that most delicate, difficult, and important of issues, how we maintain the uniqueness, the attractiveness, the splendor of Leckhampton within the framework of the College of Corpus Christi. So let me then ask JD first to briefly walk us through some of the insights of the master planning process on the site. We'll run all of those three together, and then I'm on for as much question and intervention as you at the end of this long day feel minded to give us. JD.
Thank you, Master. So I'm not sure where I should start. I think I can block it over here. So what I'm going to just talk very over there. Okay. Just, very informally. I just want to make sure this is going to work. Through the master plan that was devised for us by Rutherford Watson Mann, and it's worth saying that they did not do this on their own. This was one of the most intensively consulted sort of projects I've been involved in since I've come to Corpus. So there was a working group dedicated to Leckhampton that I was chairing, and a working group dedicated to the Old House. And we both fed into a set of kind of plans that arose organically and from very close study by the architects. WW&M include among their numbers architects who were trained here at the university. And probably, I guess, the most high profile project in Cambridge they're doing now is this large expansion at Clare, if you've seen the temporary bridge. So I'm going to just talk very informally, but I think I left this slide up. This is all taken from the presentation that they made to the governing body in this room, that was then immediately followed by a very festive high table. So this was last summer. That's not a euphemism for anything. It was just a festive high table. But it was just a very interesting opportunity to think really carefully about the spaces that we move in and around and inhabit on an everyday basis. And their drawings, I'm really fond of their drawings. They're these very beautiful, evocative, but very, in some ways, very. They have an air of, I think, of kind of graceful provisionality about them. So, so I'll just kind of walk us through the parts that pertain to Leckhampton. I just would say, when I was just remembering today, when I decided to come to Corpus, I'm hoping that the college would also take me into its into the fellowship. I had a meeting with I think 1 or 2 other colleges, and on one day, and then I said, forget about it. I'll just walk back to Corpus and talk to Marina, and agree to initiate this process, which resulted in my eventually becoming a fellow. And then as soon as that happened, I was escorted by the then warden, James Buxton, like, wait, we've forgotten to show you Leckhampton. And no one had ever mentioned it, actually, during, not that I had had that many meetings, but it really was, it's kind of the Brigadoon, if you know that movie. It's like the Brigadoon of Cambridge. Like, nobody knows where it is. And people who've lived here for decades, sometimes they'll show up for a reception, and having been completely unaware of its existence. It's something magical about the way you have to come all the way off of Grange Road, but then it projects mostly towards on a different axis. And so it's sort of hidden, but hidden in plain sight. And I'd already been won over, but it was, one of the things that really fully made me very happy about having made that decision. And I think one of its pleasures is its architectural heterogeneity, with the Victorian sort of Queen Anne style building, the post-war modernism of the GTD, and then the incorporation of the sort of later modernism of Deco, and then the Edwardian Cranmer Road villas. So these, I know this won't be these slides are a little bit smaller than I would like them to be, but this is the site as it is. And this gives us a sense of some of the overarching ambitions of the plan, which I think will become more apparent. But the WWM, these are the main points of consideration: access, landscape, integration, sustainability, and optimization. I'm mostly going to be talking about landscape and integration because the detail on the last two is beyond my scientific understanding. But this basically, as beautiful as Leckhampton is, there's a number of problems that have to do with the way so much traffic, both delivery and car traffic, is sent up the drive. And then one ends in the parking lot, which is effectively, one kind of ends up in a parking lot, which is something that was never really intended, but it's just become a sort of happenstance feature of the place. I'm trying to figure out the pointer, where, does anyone know which one is the pointer? Does anyone?
Just use your finger.
I use my finger.
No.
So you end up here, and you basically are looking at the back of the GTB, which is really one of the most remarkable and beautiful and actually architecturally important buildings, as I'm sure those of you who are listening to Peter's talk, in Cambridge or maybe anywhere in this country built in the post-war period. So you're not seeing it from its most attractive vantage point, and you end up with this kind of Netherland. The service areas, the service buildings are along here, so it's a kind of strange point of arrival. So the plan was to sort of think about this and to make an advantage of the heterogeneity. This was WWNM's suggestion to us, and to think of it as a campus sort of along the lines of a North American university campus. I'm not privileging that because I'm North American, but it does make sense of the sort of the different historical strata that are represented in the site, but which have never been as clearly joined up as they might be. So some of the plans to create this kind of campus garden site is to actually make the drive narrower so that only service vehicles would be allowed up, and other vehicles allowing people to have access, or disabled access, and so that the gardens as we know them between the co-building, and this is where the laundry and the other service buildings are, all of this would sort of be opened up and linked through a network of paths that would create sort of another quad here in between the rear of the GTV and the co-building, along with an expansion of the gym and the playing fields. And so this gives you some of the sort of an idea of some of this rationalization, and the way that this would just be a much more inviting, not only more attractive and more inviting, but it would also bring Cranmer Road, those villas, whose more attractive aspect is obviously that's facing the garden. So something strange about that period in architecture is often the facades that face the street are extraordinarily plain, and they sort of hold, they're kind of hold their cards for the garden. So in that sense, it's very kind of private architecture. And so we do see these villas from their best advantage from inside the space where no one ever is, unless they're crossing to do their laundry. So it's a hugely, in my mind, a kind of underutilized and very beautiful part of the gardens. And we all know how beautiful the gardens are behind the house, but this is actually something that much more use could be made of. And so this gives us a sense also of maybe the improvement and the rationalization of the Cranmer Road villas, many of which are in need of significant repair and improvement. And so this is giving you an idea of what this kind of campus garden might look like. So here we would be on a more or less somewhat a drive, a Leckhampton drive that's more aimed at or suited for the bicycle, the pedestrian, and the occasional delivery. And here you're seeing the opening up of this sort of campus area and the incorporation of the villas, which really, in a way, sort of just have never been fully integrated into the site. These are sort of beyond. So there's also been some thinking put into improvement of the gym area, the squash, and of course the abutting shed, which are really not, if anyone's been to the gym recently, you don't really need to go there. I wouldn't recommend it today, but it serves its purpose, but it doesn't serve its purpose as well as it might do. In the pavilion, there was actually a building of some architectural interest, but also perhaps underutilized. And so sort of using the Trinity Hall gym as a potential model, thinking about creating a new gym, that would provide more for the needs of the students with a possible extension. So this gives it a sense of the full range of buildings like Hampton House, the GTB, the Co, the Pavilion, and an enlarged gym and the shed and service areas. I just took this yesterday, actually, in when I could spare a moment to think about this presentation. The third or fourth time that I've been asked to stand in front of you today, so I hope you're not tired of me at this point. You'll hear from me once more, actually, this evening. But this, I was pretty proud of how well I pulled off this panorama shot. Just it's incredibly, I don't know if it was my just sheer innervation and exhaustion that allowed me so gracefully to capture the. But this is a sort of indication of where you arrive, which is in a kind of unattractive, in a sense, interstitial area. Although you are seeing, actually, this looks better than it does in real life because much of that is sort of occluded by, or you're distracted by the parking, the bikes, and so on. And of course, these are the service areas, service buildings that it's thought we might eventually want to eliminate so as to bring the Cranmer Road, the gardens of the Cranmer Road villas. This would no longer be paved. This would be grassed and landscaped. And it would be like entering a whole new system of extremely attractive and welcoming spaces. And so I think that is, oh wait, there we go. And one of the key additions that, and one of the things that I'm most grateful to WWM for proposing is that you'll have seen, as beautiful as it's been to see these marquees lit up at night, and it's been such a fun and festive reimagining of Leckhampton. Part of the reason that we needed to have this second marquee by the GTB is we're really short on meeting space. And so we have basically this room, which serves a variety of purposes. It's really awkwardly suited to having like the Leck talks or the Stephen Hales talks, which actually we've begun holding in what I hope you appreciate is the recently renovated GTB library, which we opened just in time to close it for the pandemic. But the effort there, and it was very generously supported by the master and then Bursar, and we tried to return as much as possible with Peter Carolyn's advice and counsel to an image of what it was like when it was first built, so it's sort of mid-century splendor. But nonetheless, there is and so that is serving, sort of double duty with a reading library and a place of study and occasional quiet conversation, but also a meeting room. And so what they've proposed, which I think is a really interesting idea, is to build potentially a meeting room on the back of what is now the parking, sort of near the bicycle storage, that would sort of extend those buildings into this newly planned garden space and quad, and would solve this really critical problem of having a proper lecture room at the site. So this, as lovely as it is to see everyone here in this room, it's primarily a hall. And I think that would be an enormous benefit to the social and I think in particular the intellectual life of the community here. And so that gives a sense of the way, this is what things look like now according to their rendering. And this would be an imagining of this new, and they've kind of imagined a sort of transparent space. But this kind of very gentle addition to the modernist architecture of the GTB, which allows it to kind of extend into this area and do the work of linking up these various spaces and both visually and I think sort of spiritually as well. So that's all I was going to say. So I hope that just gives you a sense. And these are obviously enormous ambitions that we've set for ourselves, and it just gives us a sense of. I think it cultivated in all of us a real appreciation of what it is we actually have. But also how we haven't always necessarily made the best use of the things we've been gifted with. So I think I'll just stop there. Thank you.
So as I mentioned, we'll take any questions or interventions at the end. And JG is absolutely right in the sense of what we're walking past you today are a series of unashamedly grand plans. It's unashamedly ambitious, but it seems to me that if you want to think about where you want to take a community, both in terms of supporting its people, we'll now move on to that, you also need to think about its built environment. But after 60 years, it seemed to me that the inflection point that we'd reached at this anniversary was not one that needed to be honoured by building yet another new building, but it was one that needed to be honoured by optimizing what we already had, and what we've seen today can be so thoroughly celebrated. And it seems to me that one of the virtues of the master plan is that we will start really to get the advantage of the sum of the various parts of Leckhampton. But let's move on then from thinking about that built environment to thinking more widely about the people who populate it. And it's fair to say that in the last 5 years, this university and therefore this college have come up against a series of significant obstacles when it comes to funding graduate students, particularly graduate students from overseas. And that's a raw problem, which is exaggerated when one starts to think about the necessity of widening participation at graduate level. We'll also hear something about how we've been wrestling with that. Michael.
Thank you, Master. So I was given one piece of advice with these before dinner talks, which is never include data and graphs, but I am a physicist, and I hope you will forgive me. I know some of you in the audience are also physicists. But what I wanted to do is just spend 5 or 10 minutes giving you a snapshot of how we fund postgraduate students. And as the Master has said, think a little bit ahead to some of the challenges, some of the headwinds that we face both within this college and the university. So we have around 24,000 students in Cambridge at the moment. 11,000 of these are postgraduate students. Evenly split almost between genders, 5,900 male, 5,300 female. But one of the most interesting things, I think, and one of the great strengths of this university is that the majority of our postgraduate students come from overseas. And all of you who have been here at Leckhampton have benefited from interacting with the best and brightest minds from around the world. So right now we have about 4,500 UK students, with the remainder of that 11,000 coming from the EU and internationally. Just to give you a point of reference for corpus, we have at the moment somewhere around 130 to 150 PhD students, around 40 to 50 doing MPhils or one-year degrees. So how do we fund all of these students, 11,000 students? Now, this is the only equation I'll show this evening, but the way that we cost our students is we have to support both their tuition as well as their maintenance. So to give you a sense of some of these numbers, I took some random courses off the website. If you are interested in a PhD in archaeology, you will be spending somewhere around £9,400 if you're a UK student, 28,000 if you're an overseas student. An MPhil in classics, about 13,000 for a home student, and 30,000 for an overseas student. So that's a typical indicative cost for an MPhil or PhD in this university. In addition to that, students need to be able to cover their maintenance. And that means rent, that means food, that means living expenses, drinks at the Leckhampton bar, etc. That comes out to be about £16,000 per year. So you're looking for around 30,000 or so per year for a UK student, and getting up towards 50,000 per year for an international student. We also hope to award our students some additional support, a little bit of money to traveling to conferences, and for international students, we hope to be able to cover their health surcharges and applying for visa fees. So these are big numbers. These are, out of the reach of, I think, the average person to pay out of their pocket. So where do we get the money to fund our students? I had a look at data. So this is the incoming cohort in 2021 to Leckhampton, the ones who joined us in October of that year. And I've got just two charts here. One looks at students on the one-year course, so MPhils, LLMs, these sorts of things. 70% of those students funded their degree themselves. And that is a fascinating figure. These people are taking out additional loans, they're borrowing money, they're really pressing themselves financially for that opportunity to get the MPhil. I think this is too high. You can see the sort of barrier that this creates to students from widening participation backgrounds. Not everyone has access to that kind of money to fund themselves. 20% of our corpus students on one-year degrees got an external scholarship, so some funding from a large agency, which I'll talk about in a moment. And around 10%, the college was able to make a contribution, and we call that college match funding. I'll say a little bit more about that. PhD degrees, the pie chart looks completely different. So most of those students, almost 80%, had some kind of external scholarship. Around 10% again, we were able to offer a contribution, and a small number were able to fund themselves, 13%. So where do these students get the external funding for? We are a very popular college, so we don't quite get as many applicants as Trinity, but not far off, actually. So in terms of college choice, although we talk about Leckhampton being a secret, the secret is out to potential applicants. And we are a very desirable college for applications. So we typically come in second, third, fourth in terms of the total number of applicants. And this means we can choose some of the very best, most competitive people for funding here at Corpus. So a number of our students will receive full maintenance plus tuition from organizations like the Gates. We have, I think, a privileged window into the Cambridge Australia scholarships, and there's one scholarship holder sitting there. Charles Allen was the benefactor who set that up and was also here at Corpus. And many of our Australian scholarship holders come here. A very fascinating thing that's just about to launch. The university has received a pledge of $100 million from MasterCard to fund MPhil degrees for students from Africa, and particularly those students from Africa who come from areas where studying in the UK would be out of the question. And that is my phone, which I forgot to turn off. It's just a reminder. So that's something very exciting that's launching. And then, of course, many of our students will get support from the research councils. And here is one of the places where we are starting, I think, to suffer. The money going into funding PhD studentships and MPhil studentships is dwindling and is being concentrated more into, certainly on the PhD side, things called Center for Doctoral Trainings. And this is where you have a particular applied theme and you get funding for 5 years focused on that. And when that wraps up, that's the end of it. As an example, in the Cavendish, where I am, when I came to this university about 15 years ago, we had 30 PhD studentships to be allocated to the wildest, best and brightest students, no matter what their subject. We now have 6 or 7. The rest are now into very specific targeted funding that is around particular projects. So that's a real shift for us, and I think something that, at least for me, sends off some alarm bells. Other sources of funding, we used to get quite a lot of money from the EU coming to this university. We don't get so much of that anymore, and that has certainly impacted our ability to support students. But it's not all bad news. There are headwinds, but I wanted to mention something that this college is getting increasingly good at, and that is providing match funding arrangements. And I'll just explain a little bit what that means. That means Corpus goes back to back with another funder to cover part of the cost of a postgraduate degree. So we can offer, say, to cover tuition or maintenance, and we can approach a funder and make a match. And that allows us to leverage the amount of money we have. It also allows them to leverage their money, and everybody is quite happy with that arrangement. It's a lot of paperwork to fill out, but in the end, I think it works out very well for the college and for the students. A couple of examples of success we've had in recent years. We have the Keith Sykes studentship in Italian, and that's something that's, I think, just quite exciting for us. The Judith E. Wilson and Corpus studentship in English, and this goes to an MPhil student from an ethnic minority background. We have a partnership just launching this year with a livery company from London, the Girdlers Company Scholarship, and that will fund 1 new PhD in any subject per year. So we'll build it up to a total of 3 at any given time. And we think this college match funding arrangement is the way that we want to go. We're now in a position to award 6 to 7 per year in these match funded arrangements. I would personally love to see this double before I leave this college and retire. But I think that's that's definitely the direction of travel for us as an institution. We get a lot of benefit with these match funded arrangements.
Michael, thank you very much. So the bottom line takeaways from that are that the numbers are surprisingly large. 50,000 for an overseas student wishing to do an MPhil. One further thing that I would mention when thinking about Michael's graphs is to remember that, and let us take that imaginary classicist, that one cannot progress to a PhD in the humanities unless one has an MPhil. So that graph that moves from self-funding to institutional funding needs to be read against that necessary progression. And that only goes to underline the difficulty of accessing those with the capability but without the personal resources, as it were, to get onto the academic track through the MPhil. And the withdrawal of public and research council funding for the MPhil in the last 10 years, I think, has been one of the great distorting factors and one of the great challenges to building a graduate community. Marina.
Thank you very much, Christopher. I think that many of you already know me, but perhaps not everybody. My name is Marina Frasca-Spada. I am the senior tutor here. I have been since 2007. And I am not a scientist. I am a historian of philosophy and a philosopher of science. So I will not produce, not only I will not produce no figures, but not even a PowerPoint. Just talk, as philosophers tend to do. And what I want to tell you is nothing to do either with the history or with the present, very much of Leckhampton, but with the fact that corpus at large is a college with a secret. You have heard already that there is a bit of a well-known secret about the existence of Leckhampton. It's absolutely extraordinary how nobody in the town, but even in the university, seems to know all that much about it. I have people who I've known for 30 years here in Cambridge who just, when they come over here, say, oh. So, it's not the secrets that I have in mind. Think for a moment of corpus at large as a college. What is the ethos, the general attitude, the general presentation? It is a small college. It is very much in the center of town. It is very much at the center of the university itself as an institution. It is a college that is very beautiful. It is a college which has a certain sort of interest in preserving some of its own traditions. So, for example, we follow our traditions in glorying in the success of our students, academically and otherwise, but indeed in glorying in the success and in the achievements of all our members, alumni, students, and fellows alike. But also, we very much like to have our college feasts and meals just so. So good food, served at a stately pace, good conversation, wearing our gowns. We do like very much wearing our gowns at times, because we have the impression that wearing a gown is some sort of symbol of being part of this particular community with its habits, which at times are a bit quaint. But on the other hand, we like them just like that. Other things that we like very much. We are extremely proud of our color silver. Not to mention the manuscripts in the Barker Library. And whenever there is an opportunity to show off the silver or the manuscripts, off we go. And the silver we particularly like to show off with a certain blasé, sprezzatura, as we call it in Italian. Oh, you know, I am drinking from the 16th century stuff that in the British Museum would keep under sort of protected glass, and they're plugging away some terrible punch from. So you can see that the picture of this institution, which imagines is academically ambitious, probably boxing a bit above its weight in some respects, but also very attached to certain traditions, certain little habits, quaint and so on. Aha! But then there is Leckhampton. And it emerges that this rather traditional institution has a heart, which is very hip. Leckhampton is the hip heart of the community at Corpus Christi College. Now, everybody who lives in Leckhampton or has lived in it, including myself, I have lived for a year in one of the attics in the villa. So I'm very familiar with that. But on the other hand, this does not apply only to those who have the privilege of living here. I have the impression that this is a secret coolness that Leckhampton represents. It's the coolness of the entire college. We have this incredible cool with us. Look at us, aren't we incredible? So Leckhampton is a fundamental part of our college as a community. And it's a fundamental part because it represents that element of cool that I think is very essential. Now, I would hate not to mention something having to do with the future of the college community. I don't know how many of you are aware, and if you're not, it's not your fault, of the fact that as part of that cool heart, we have in the last 3 or 4 years taken a series of very revolutionary initiatives in wider participation expression, which I'm not entirely sure how meaningful it is if you're not in the business, but basically it means trying to extend the privilege of being at university, at Cambridge, and I think at Corpus, to a variety of young people who are from backgrounds which are not normally very well represented either at university, let alone Cambridge and Parish Without Corpus. So we are extending that. We have done a whole series of things. Normally having to do, so the first one we have called the bridging course, and it is something to give young undergraduates when they arrive a leg up to catch up with a certain amount of academic and social confidence. Now, from undergraduate bridging course, we have moved on with this image of the bridging to postgraduates as well, and we are now nourishing an entire bridging program. Now, the first part of the bridging program for postgraduates has already started. And it has started with a cooperation with the School of Life Sciences, which is called Experiencing Life Sciences, and which brings for 8 weeks a certain number of reasonably senior undergraduates from other universities, which are perhaps less exalted than Cambridge, to work on a research project in a laboratory here in Cambridge. And we have twinned with the School of Life Sciences to host a group of these people, of these young people. 15 of them have spent 8 weeks between July and August here at Leckhampton, together with our own postgraduates, and of course not only in Leckhampton, also in laboratories doing their research projects. It has been an unbelievable experience. It has gone, I think, very well. Everybody seems to be fantastically excited, including myself, of course. And we are now waiting to see. But we expect that a certain number of them will actually want to apply to come to do postgraduate research at Cambridge, and probably given the experience that they have had with us at Corpus, we obviously give them formal call and so on and so on. Yeah. Well, I mean, the sort of traditional and quaint bit we are very attached to, but on the other hand, they were staying here, so they had both of them. So we are very much hoping also to connect with what Michael was saying, to be able to do some match funding for these people, because it goes without saying that precisely because they are from underrepresented backgrounds, these are exactly the people for whom it is particularly important to be able to get a bit of support. And we think that matched funding is the best way to go. We are already discussing this with the School of Life Sciences, and we are very much hoping that we will be able to do something starting with next year. And in this way, I think that we are wanting to celebrate once more the sheer pool that Leckhampton represents in the heart of the college. Thank you.
We have a little time before what I now understand is the obligatory festive dinner takes place. So if there are any questions or interventions, please do put up your hand. And Eliza, again, this is not amplified, so this is for the recording. Is everyone exhausted? Mark.
Hi, thank you. Thank you all for the presentations. They're exciting, they're thrilling. It's wonderful to see the future unfolding. I'm wondering what type of timelines or timeframes do you have in the vision that you set out, JD, and how you want to see it pursued? Do you have anything in particular in mind?
Well, it's a very vulgar answer to that question. And the vulgar answer is I can move as fast as I have funding. The temperate answer to that question is to ask, what can the college afford to do in the absence of generous donors? You've seen already from the last slide of Michael's that what we've been able to achieve already is a result of match funding, and a lot of that, indeed the majority of that, has been recent funds given to us generously by benefactors. And as it were, we can expand that project rapidly if we're able to access funds. We can match more with the research councils because we continue, as Michael emphasized, to be a popular college, so that we are attracting graduates of greater quality than we have funds to support. So that's a simple answer on that front. More complicated on the buildings front, not only because JD showed you one aspect of the master plan, and there's of course a series of jigsaws and connections with the old house, and there's a separate piece that speaks importantly to sustainability. That is, that it would be completely irresponsible for an institution like ourselves to renovate or upgrade buildings without being sensitive to sustainability and the need, for example, to move away as quickly as possible from generating heat by gas or all of those other aspects. And of course, one of the magnificences of Leckhampton speaks immediately to ground source heat pumps as a way of heating this estate. So these are various interlocking aspects. The college, despite the magnificence of its feasts and its historic silver and manuscripts, which we cannot sell, does therefore not have a large degree of excess resource. And indeed, as we enter a period of likely high inflation, of spiking energy costs, we, as it were, or I feel as though those reserves are less than I thought they were before the pandemic. My projection is more pessimistic than it might have been if you'd asked me that question 3 years ago. I've set up a working party, since here amongst friends we can speak truth. I've set up a working party to look at the master plan and devise what I call master plan light. because there's some aspects of that plan that I think will be transformative to our estate that are not particularly expensive in the scheme of things. So, for example, the greening of the driveway to Leckhampton, the creation of a green court outside the GTB where a car park now lies, perhaps the additional ambition of sweeping away the maintenance sheds and the laundries to sort of get a more integrated view of Leckhampton, bringing the lime walk back into our sense of the estate. These, in the scheme of things, are not significantly expensive, and I think that the college can thoughtfully manage those with its resource. But in terms of pushing forward with the big ambitions, both for Leckhampton and for the old house, I'll be absolutely frank in saying that we will not get particularly far in the absence of a major generous donor. And I've merely said what's been implicit in the presentation this evening, but I wanted to be honest with you where we are on all of those fronts. The limited resource which I can muster at the moment, as you see from Marina's presentation, I want to direct as far as possible into those kind of partnership programs with the university, experiencing life sciences, which keeps corpus at the table in the university when it comes to talking about widening participation or changing the nature of the graduate population. And I'm, in a sense, extraordinarily hopeful. I'm optimistic and always enthused by these kinds of gatherings, that I can keep the college long enough in those conversations that we will suddenly be advanced by a generous benefaction that will enable us to do more. I mean, that's, in a sense, a description of what I think my job here is.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
It's not magnified, it's for the recording only.
Okay. I will shout. Okay. So you were telling us earlier that obviously with Brexit, Cambridge has lost EU funding. I was wondering whether you can expand a little bit more into that, and tell us a little bit more about the impact that Brexit has had on Cambridge and Corpus in particular, also in terms of intake, of EU students, just to get a sense, of how this has really affected.
Remind me of the depressing figures of European intake at undergraduate level.
Yes,
thanks.
pre-Brexit, undergraduate students would pay home fees, and indeed postgraduates would as well. Now they pay international fees. We used to, at the undergraduate level, have anywhere from a dozen to 15 per year coming in. We now have zero. 0 to 1. 0 to 1.
So in terms of the creation of an international community, one of the challenges that now faces us is that our undergraduate body is looking more home than it used to. And that's one of the differences that I regret and want to close between the undergraduate community and the graduate community. But we've talked about this in terms of the admission of European graduates, but the situation for the university is significantly more serious. That is, that this university was the most successful university in the United Kingdom in attracting European funding and in its partnerships with European universities. And that is simply drying up. And that means that the infrastructure that put this university, as we heard so clearly in Richard Henderson's excellent talk, generated the research and the research groups and the funding for that made this university world leading across a range of disciplines. That funding is set to dry up within the next 5 years. That is to say that we've now participated in the last round of European funding, and the UK government has not made good on its promise that it would fill the gap and supply locally through research councils the money that used to come to universities from Europe. So I'm very pessimistic about that. In a sense, we can do at a college level as much as we can to fund individual European students, both at undergraduate and postgraduate level. But the outflow of resource that's the result of the government not replacing European funding is a significant structural problem for this university if it's to remain world leading across the kinds of areas of research that we've been celebrating today.
Can I
Yeah.
ask a follow-up? So given the dire situation you've just described, given the dire situation you've just described, are you or other colleges going to make an even greater push to attract overseas students? And I kind of mean a lot of Asian students, they may be able to somehow make up for the lost fees and, somehow allow your college to fund, other constituencies.
So the answer to that question is firmly yes and firmly no. Let me explain. I'm absolutely committed to the excellence in Cambridge as an international commodity. So I'm absolutely committed to keeping the Leckhampton community an international community and to extending that as far as we can also to our undergraduate community. That's the yes part. The no part is that I won't be, like so many other higher education institutions in this country. I mean no criticism. I understand their situation. I won't be relying on one particular Far Eastern country to supply a large proportion of my overseas graduates. I think that that's dangerous politically, but it also speaks to the kind of international community that I'd like to create in the college and Leckhampton. I'd like to create something that's much more reflective of our world. And in some ways, I think that having myself been an undergraduate in Australia, I lament the way in which the old Commonwealth is now less expressed in the graduate community than it used to be 30 or 40 years ago. And I think that Cambridge has a powerful enough selling point attraction that it can afford to be a balanced world community rather than thinking that one particular country or one particular region is going to be the answer for the next 10 years. I guess I'd suppose if you pushed me, rather move more slowly to get something that was more balanced and more reflective of the global community. Hence why Michael and I are really excited by the MasterCard opportunity. Because if you look at a map of the world and you see where Cambridge graduates are coming from, postgraduates are coming from, there is a blank in continental Africa. And the MasterCard is the first attempt to try and move the construction of an international community so that it captures continental Africa. And I'm more interested in that project because I think that Cambridge is the global brand where that can actually be achieved. So I think we ought to sort of have a go at trying that. We're near the end. I think we can take one more if there's... If there's not, I'd just like to say by way of end that we've celebrated today, and we'll do so at the dinner, one important anniversary, the 60th anniversary of Leckhampton. But also this year we celebrate the 40th anniversary of the admission of female fellows, and also the admission of the first female graduates to Leckhampton. Next year, we'll celebrate the 40th anniversary of the matriculation of women undergraduates to Corpus. So in a sense, this celebration of Leckhampton's anniversary is the beginning for me of a year, 18 months of significant anniversaries that mark not only important moments in the creation of the modern college, but are also inflection points for us, as we've done this afternoon, to think about what kind of future we might like for the college, what kind of future we'd like to commit to Leckhampton. And if by way of conclusion I could borrow a line from the senior tutor's talk, Corpus is indeed a small college, but my ambition is that it should always box above its weight. Rachel, we now move to the next part of the festivities. Thank you.